bed about an hour early. Okay, here we go, the next one, the dreaded fraction. X minus 2 equals x over 5 plus 6. I'm going to show you two different ways to work this. Okay. The first way is to leave it as a fraction. Anthony, make sure you erase it before you leave for us. Thanks, sir. The first way is to leave it as a fraction. X over 5, let me review for you real quick how we can write that. X divided by 5, that's 1x, correct? So I can put that as 1x over 5. Do you remember how I showed you could separate that the other day? What could I write 1x over 5 as? 1, you're close. There you go, 1/5 times x. You remember that? X over 5 is the same thing as 1/5 x, so if you're going to leave the fractions, you really need to do that. 1/5 x plus 6. 1x over 5 is the same thing as 1/5 x. Do you remember why? Because how do you do 1/5 times x? You'll put x over 1 and multiply tops, multiply bottoms, you get x over 5. You can do that. So I wrote it as 1/5 x. Now we got x's on both sides. We have to get them on the same side. You can either move the x over here, or you can move the 1/5 x over here. What should I move in order to have positives instead of negatives? The 1/5 x. Okay? So we're going to move 1/5 x to the left side. I've got 1x. Let's think about this, because I don't want to find common denominators and do any of that. I have 1x. If I take 1/5 of an x away, how many fifths am I left with? 4/5. You have a whole, you take away a fifth, you're left with 4/5, right? You have a pizza sliced 5 ways. If you take out one out of those 5 pizzas, you're left with 4/5. So we move 1/5 to the left, and we now have 4/5 x minus 2 equals 6. Any questions? What's my next step? Plus 2. Good. Move that over there. So we have 4/5 x equals what? 8. Last step. How do I get 4/5 away from x? By what? Divide. Okay, let's talk about this. We have one person saying multiply and one person saying divide. Are they both right? Yes. Both people are correct. Because how do you divide fractions? You multiply, right? You flip it and you multiply. So we've got 4/5 times x. So we've got to move it over. So we're going to do divided by 4/5. How do you divide by 4/5? You multiply by 5/4. You remember that? So we got 8 over 1. Mark that out. 8 over 1 times 5 over 4. Multiply tops, multiply bottoms. 40 over 4, which is, I'll go ahead and write that. 40 over 4. 40 divided by 4 is 10. X is 10. Was that what? E. That was E, yes. Okay, Tommy, 4/5. You got one whole, right? How much did you take away? When you moved 1/5 x to the left side, what did it become? Negative 1/5. So take something. I hate fifths. Let's see, how am I going to divide that? Ooh, that's bad. Do the best I can. That's pretty close. You have one whole. This is one whole. If you take a fifth away, how many fifths are you left with? 4/5. So 1x minus 1/5 of an x is equal to 4/5 x. That makes sense. 1, 2, 3, 4 left. I had other questions. What was another one? How did I get what? Okay, x over 5. X divided by 5, that's 1x, correct? So 1 is kind of grouped with it. Remember when we did, let me take another problem. 2x divided by 3. I can write that as 2/3 x. You can split that apart. For the reason right here. If I do 2/3 x, that's the same thing as 2/3 times x over 1. Multiply that back out. What do you get on top? Over. You can split fractions when they have variables on top by doing that. That'd be 2/3 x. Okay? Makes sense. Here we go. The second way of working this problem. Choose whichever way you like best. If you don't like fractions, watch really closely. Anytime you have fractions, if you don't want to deal with fractions, if you don't want to say, okay, 1 minus 1/5 is 4/5, if you don't want to have to split x over 5 into 1/5 x, watch this. Step 1, find a common denominator. In this problem, it will be easy to find a common denominator because there's only one fraction, correct? Since there's only one fraction, which is x over 5, what is your common denominator? 5. Common denominator is equal to 5. And what you're going to do, you're going to take everything, every term here, and multiply it by 5. With me? How many terms are here? 4. What's the first term? X. Multiply that by 5, you get 5x. What's the second term? -2. Multiply that by 5, you get. Here's where hopefully the only confusion that might be in these problems might come. X over 5. Multiply it by 5. Watch this. How do you multiply by 5 if it's a fraction? 5 is the same thing as 5 over 1. A lot of people multiply it by 5 over 5. They'll multiply the top by 5 and the bottom by 5. Don't do that. Because if you multiply by 5 over 5, what is 5 over 5? That's 1. That's 1 whole. You didn't multiply by 5, you multiplied by 1. Makes sense. But we want to multiply by 5. We're going to multiply the top by 5, the bottom by 5. If you know cross-canceling, go watch this. Okay, I'm going to review real quick on cross-canceling. 5 and 5, what happens to them? They cancel out. What are you left with? Just 1x, right? If you do it correctly, you'll always have stuff cross-canceling, and you'll never be left with a fraction. If you didn't want to use cross-canceling, let me show you this. If you don't understand cross-canceling, multiply the top by 5, you get 5x. Multiply the bottom by 5, you get 5. 5x divided by 5 is x. 1x, same answer. Plus, what's the last term? 6, so multiply it by 5, you get 30. Notice, there's no more fractions. So if you do not like fractions, find a common denominator, multiply everything by that common denominator, no more fractions. Okay, now, last set of steps. There's 3 more. You now have x's on both sides. Get them on the same side. Which one do you want to move? I would move the 1x, because if you move the 5x's, you're going to have negatives. Move x over, what does it become? Negative or minus 1x, because that's 1x. Move it over, minus 1x, and read for me now what you have. That's still no fractions. Want to get x by itself? What do we get rid of next? The minus 10 becomes plus 10. What do you now have now? 4x equals 40. How do you get rid of the 4? Divide by 4, x equals 10. Same answer either way. I'll slow down so you can copy that down if you would like. Okay, here we go. Next problem. You got a lot of fractions. Look at example F. 3a